The fog hung low that morning, thick enough that the tops of the trees vanished into a pale gray ceiling. A cold stillness clung to the air, the kind that made every sound sharper, every breath visible. Yanek pressed his back against the damp wooden planks of the barn ruin, heart thudding beneath his coat. He had been delivering messages for almost 2 years now, slipping through patrols, forests, checkpoints, but never had he felt the kind of tension curling inside him today. Not when he heard the name attached to the engines growling their way toward Oberki. Kaminski's brigade. The mere mention of it had emptied half the villages in the region overnight. People didn't wait to see what would happen, they simply fled, taking nothing but the clothes on their backs and whatever precious objects they could carry. Yanek himself had only come because the resistance intel was urgently needed in Warsaw, and the forest detour brought him too close to Rona patrol territory. He had planned to pass through before dawn. But the trucks arrived earlier than expected. Now he crouched behind a heap of collapsed beams and broken tiles, his breath shallow, every muscle taut. The first vehicle hissed to a stop in the center of the abandoned village. Yanek slid closer to a gap in the planks and peered out. The fog swirled around the truck as the back doors opened, revealing the men he had heard so much about. Not in official reports, those rarely mentioned Kaminski at all except when forced, but whispered among villagers, partisans, even German soldiers who spoke with uneasy glances over their shoulders. The Rona men spilled out like a pack of restless dogs. Their uniforms looked almost theatrical in their inconsistency. Some wore parts of SS attire, though often dirty or improperly fitted. Others wore Soviet tunics with German belts. Some had mismatched boots, one high and polished, the other scuffed and worn. They carried themselves with a kind of careless boldness, as though discipline was optional and fear belonged only to others. Then Bronislav Kaminski emerged. Yanek swallowed hard. He had seen pictures, grainy, stiff propaganda photos, but reality was different. Kaminski did not walk like an SS commander. He moved like someone who enjoyed being watched, who relished his own unpredictability. His expression was one of mild irritation, as if the very idea of quiet offended him. He barked orders in clipped Russian, scattering his men across the empty village. The Rona fighters fanned out immediately, their boots thudding against the frozen ground. They yanked open shutters, kicked in doors, shouted into empty rooms as if challenging silence itself. Yanek watched one man break a locked door with the butt of his rifle, step inside, and re-emerge seconds later holding a child's wooden toy. He tossed it to another soldier, laughing, as though it were a prize. Yanek felt his stomach twist. These men were not searching, they were prowling. Looking for something, anything, to fuel their restless violence. A second fighter kicked down a barn door so forcefully that the hinges snapped off. He strode inside, only to come out moments later muttering curses and kicking at the dirt in frustration. Another overturned a cart, rummaged through old tools, and then threw them aside simply to watch them scatter. Kaminski watched it all with the bored air of a man waiting for something interesting to happen. Yanek pressed back against the wall. He needed to escape. But the brigade's movements were unpredictable, no pattern, no perimeter, no rules to exploit. If he moved too soon, he would run straight into their path. He steadied his breathing, remembering what the Home Army commander had told him, stay calm. Panic leads to mistakes. But calmness was hard when the enemy was not a uniformed army obeying protocol but a lawless force that even the SS treated with caution. Cracks in the barn wall let Yanek see the entire village square. Kaminski paced back and forth, his gloved hands clasped behind him, displeasure etched across his face. He kept glancing down the rows of houses as if expecting villagers to materialize from the fog just to satisfy his need for control. His brigade responded to his mood. Their restlessness grew. They smashed windows with rifle stocks. They shouted to one another across the empty village. One man climbed onto a rooftop simply to hurl down shattered tiles, laughing each time one broke on the ground. Another fired a shot into the air, more out of boredom than purpose. The sound cracked through the cold morning like a warning. Yanek flinched. If they were firing for amusement, then he had even less time than he thought. He scanned the barn interior. A small crawlspace behind a fallen beam led to the back wall. If he squeezed through and kept low, he could reach the ditch that bordered the village. From there, he could enter the forest unseen. He waited for the moment when no patrol was near. Minutes crawled by. His fingers tingled from the cold. his breath fogged in the dim light. Finally, a group of fighters moved to the far side of the village, drawn by a loud shout from one of their comrades. Now, Yanek slid toward the gap, lowering himself onto his stomach. The mud was icy, clinging to his coat. He wriggled forward, careful to avoid snapping twigs or dislodging debris. Halfway through the gap, he paused, footsteps approached. Heavy boots. Slow. Pausing. Yanek froze. His face pressed into the damp earth. The footsteps shifted, then receded. Someone called out, and the booted man moved away. Yanek pushed forward again. He emerged behind the barn into the narrow, reed-filled ditch. The reeds were brittle but tall enough to hide him. He crawled, elbows and knees sinking into the mud, inching his way toward the tree line. Behind him, more laughter erupted. Kaminski's men must have found something else to break. He didn't look back, not until he reached the edge of the forest. When he did, he saw smoke beginning to rise from one of the cottages. Not flames, yet, but the kind of acrid smoke that meant someone was burning something out of irritation or boredom. Yanek tightened the satchel strap across his shoulder. Inside were detailed notes about Kaminski's brigade, reports describing their lack of discipline, their unpredictability, their notoriety for chaos so extreme it alarmed even their own German overseers. The resistance needed this information. They needed to know what kind of force was being unleashed across the region. Yanek turned toward the woods and vanished into the trees, leaving behind the fog, the smoke, and the unpredictable men who prowled the empty village like a storm waiting to break. The ruins of Warsaw sprawled beneath a sky darkened by smoke, the sun barely visible behind drifting ash that fell like slow, gray snow. Every building looked wounded. Walls were ripped open, beams jutted out like broken bones, and shattered glass glittered on the streets as if the city had been sprinkled with cold stars. Fires smoldered in alleyways, coughing out smoke that curled upward before merging with the haze stretching across the skyline. SS Commander Erich von dem Bach Zalewski stood on the remnants of a balcony overlooking a shattered boulevard. The stone beneath him was cracked, chunks missing where artillery had struck. From his vantage point, he could see the silhouettes of figures moving far below. Some were German troops advancing through the debris, others were shadows slipping between ruined buildings. But the group dominating the street today was neither regular Wehrmacht nor disciplined SS formations. It was Kaminski's brigade. Even from a distance, von dem Bach could spot them by their disorganized movements. They marched with no formation, no caution, no awareness of the broader operation unfolding around them. Some clustered around looted vehicles, others shouted at one another, waving rifles or gesturing wildly. A pair stood on top of an overturned trolley car, arguing loudly. A handful of others had taken over a street corner as if it were their own personal territory. This, von dem Bach thought grimly, was supposed to be an auxiliary unit aiding the suppression of the uprising. Instead, they were becoming a second front of trouble. Reports had been pouring in for 2 days, German officers complaining that they couldn't control Kaminski's men. Ammunition meant for frontline units had been seized by Rona fighters. Vehicles requisitioned by the SS were commandeered by Kaminski's men for their own purposes. They had ignored curfews, ignored orders, even ignored warnings. And when challenged, they responded with hostility, as though they believed themselves untouchable. The SS commander had seen brutality before, more than enough to numb most men, but lack of discipline was something he despised with a deeper, colder anger. Warfare, to him, required order. Chaos was an enemy, even if it wore a friendly uniform. The sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. "Commander," his adjutant said, appearing in the doorway of the ruined office behind him. "Kaminski has arrived." Von dem Bach nodded and stepped back inside. The office had once been a government bureau, now little more than exposed bricks and dust-laden desks. A section of the ceiling sagged dangerously, and a cold draft blew through the shattered windows. Kaminski entered with the swagger of someone convinced the world bent around him. His boots were polished, but his uniform bore the careless marks typical of him: improper insignia placement, a coat unbuttoned one moment and tightly fastened the next. He carried a riding crop he didn't need, tapping it against his boot as if to announce his presence. "You sent for me," Kaminski said with an unearned casualness, as though this were a friendly meeting between equals. "I hope it's good news." Von dem Bach said nothing at first. He studied Kaminski's posture, the smug tilt of his chin, the way his eyes flicked around the room not with caution but with curiosity, like a tourist inspecting war ruins. Finally, the SS commander spoke. I have received multiple reports concerning the conduct of your brigade. Complaints. Kaminski shrugged dismissively. Warsaw is already ruined. What difference does it make if my men are enthusiastic? Von dem Bock's eyes narrowed slightly. Your men are undermining the operation. They are disobeying orders. They are interfering with German troops. They are jeopardizing the broader goals of this offensive. But Kaminski only smiled, folding his arms. My brigade inspires fear. Terror is a weapon in itself. The effects are useful. Useful. The word lingered in the dust-filled air. Von dem Bock held his composure, though a pulse of irritation flickered behind his eyes. Terror without discipline is not a weapon. It is a liability. For a moment, the room grew very quiet. The distant rumble of artillery echoed through the ruins, shaking dust from the ceiling. Kaminski seemed not to notice. Look, he said, stepping closer, lowering his voice to what he likely believed was a persuasive tone. You gave me freedom to operate. I am doing exactly what you asked, spreading fear, breaking resistance, showing the Poles what happens when they defy the Reich. Von dem Bock stared at him, expression unreadable. You have confused freedom with chaos. Kaminski's smile faltered. The SS commander continued, voice low and controlled, the way a surgeon might speak before making a precise incision. Your brigade is no longer an asset. It is a threat, to the operation, to discipline, and to the chain of command. Kaminski opened his mouth to protest, but von dem Bock raised a hand, silencing him. This meeting is concluded. The dismissal was absolute. Kaminski's jaw clenched. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty passed through his expression. But pride restrained him from arguing openly. He turned sharply and strode out, the riding crop tapping irritably against his leg. His boots echoed down the cracked hallway before fading into the distance. When the ruined office finally fell silent, the adjutant stepped closer. Shall I prepare the recommendation? Yes, von dem Bock said quietly, looking out through the broken window at the chaos on the street below. Kaminski's brigade still moved like a disorderly mass, unchecked and dangerous. Immediate removal. He didn't need to explain. The SS had its methods. Within days, Kaminski was summoned to Lodz under the pretense of attending a leadership conference. He arrived expecting recognition for his contributions. Instead, the reception was quiet. Too quiet. He was led through narrow corridors, past closed doors, to a courtyard shielded from outside view. What happened there spread only in whispers. The only confirmed fact was that Kaminski didn't return. When news reached his brigade, a strange hush fell over them. Their swagger dimmed. Their careless laughter ceased. Men who had carried themselves with unshakable arrogance suddenly looked unsure of their footing in the world. The message was clear, even they were not beyond consequence. Janek, hiding with his home army unit in the outskirts of the city, heard the rumor from a factory worker who passed information through underground channels. The worker delivered it in a hushed tone, as though speaking a forbidden prayer. Kaminski is gone. For Janek, the words felt unreal at first. Kaminski had seemed larger than life, a storm in human form, one that even the SS struggled to contain. Yet storms burned themselves out eventually. His disappearance did not end the occupation, nor the suffering, nor the destruction engulfing Warsaw, but it marked a shift. A reminder that chaos, no matter how powerful, eventually destroys itself. And in the ruins of the city, where ash mixed with the cold September wind, Janek allowed himself, briefly, to feel something like hope.